Welcome and ting and ting and ting. Back with another video for all you, another reaction video, and this one is called the most incredible Scotsman you've ever heard of. You know what I mean? I want to find out who that is, you understand? So we're going to look at another one. I think this one is from Scotland History Tours again. You know, my man be bumping it. Go check out his channel and all of that. And in the meantime, I'd like to thank everybody who have commented on those videos. Keep it coming, you know, hit me up with your history and stuff like that. Let's all learn about each other from each other. Thank you again for the comments, you understand? And those who drop likes on the videos, thank you, man. You know what I mean? I like it when a lot of people pay attention to things with me, you know what I mean? That means we're all learning together. Find some kind of camaraderie. Let's go ahead and YouTube and simmer and see what this, who the most incredible Scotsman is.
If the story I'm about to tell you wasn't well documented, you'd have thought I made it up. If you're interested in the people, places and events in Scottish history, then click the subscribe button at the bottom right of the screen and ring the notification bell to be told when I upload new videos. In the meantime, let me tell you a story. The story I'm going to tell you today involves heinous criminals dressed as respectable merchants. It involves savagery, strength of character and survival, courage, ingenuity and bloody-minded determination. But it starts with a little boy born in a Boyne in 1730. His name was Peter Williamson. He was the third child of a farming family round about here. Before he reached his teens, his dad sent him to live with his aunt in Aberdeen. Now, for a wee laddie, Aberdeen must have been a vibrant, interesting and ultimately dangerous place. I already made a video to describe what happened next. It tells how young children like Peter were often abducted in the streets of Aberdeen and surrounding area to be put on ships and sent off as indentured servants to the Americas. For this shocking background, you can come back and click for the video top right. The thing is that this story contains so much that
Wow. Kidnapping kids and taking them off to other lands to do slave type work. And to think, this stuff is still going on today. Stuff is still going on today. Is money the root of all evil? Is human beings the root of all evil? Money ain't got no recourse. It's an inanimate object. Human beings have the capacity to control themselves, control their extreme desires. You understand what I'm saying? The extreme quest for money to get to the point where we have to enslave other people. And it's been going on forever and ever, man. Let's keep going here.
I can only skim the surface. Just like the ship that skimmed the Atlantic carrying Peter and the rest of its indentured human payload. But off the southern tip of New Jersey, the skimming stopped, replaced by the deafening sound of a storm-tossed ship crashing on the waves. Sailors manning the longboat as they brushed aside the screaming, clamouring, clutching cargo. The next day, with sea becalmed, they returned to the little island of Cape May to collect what had survived. The prospect of servitude had turned into a night of terror, and then one glimpse of freedom at daybreak, before back to a future of servitude. It's a roller coaster that few of us will ever ride, and his journey had barely begun. The next stop was an auction in Philadelphia where Peter's future was sold for £16. In some ways, he'd struck it lucky. You see, he was bought by another Scotsman called Hugh Wilson. Now a Pennsylvania farmer, Wilson himself had been abducted from my hometown in Perth.
Wow.
He treated Peter much better than many apprentices or indentured servants would have expected, and it goes without saying that their status, class and treatment was a world apart from the enslaved black Africans that suffered at the same time. The young Peter struck a deal with Hugh Wilson. He wanted to learn to read and write. He saw other people doing it, and if his master would let him go to school, he'd extend his period of indenture from 7 to 8 years. It was worth a year of his life to be able to read and write. As it was, he would never finish his indenture with Hugh Wilson. 4 years before the end of Peter's service, Hugh Wilson died. And in his will, he left Peter his clothes, his best horse, a saddle, and $200 to start a new life. For 7 years, Peter travelled, took jobs where he could, and saw the life of this new land. Then, at 24, he settled down and married Rose, the daughter of a Pennsylvania farmer. They made life on a farm on some land that her father gave to them further west. 11 years ago, Peter had been a ragamuffin abducted in the streets of Aberdeen and sold in indentured servitude. Now, he was a fully grown man with a beautiful wife and a home. His own father had rented a farm in Aberdeenshire, but Peter was a Pennsylvania landowner.
See, here's a question I have about that, okay? Now, does the stigma of indentured servants carry them on through their life? You know what I mean? No matter how much prestige and stuff they seem to have gained, they still were indentured servants. And do their grandchildren, do their children suffer under that indentured servants idea? You know what I'm saying? Or was it easier for them to blend in to the upper echelons of society? That would be interesting to know.
The only problem was that land further west encroached on Indian land. That's certainly the term they would have used at the time. Land taken by skullduggery and subterfuge to accommodate the waves of white folks crossing the Atlantic. There may be trouble ahead. Territorial tensions weren't just with the native people. The growing English colonies were also a threat to French interests. The French sought to impose their authority on some of the natives. Worse still, in 1748, some Virginian businessmen, Thomas Lee and two brothers, Lawrence and Augustine Washington, had organized the Ohio Company. They petitioned George II, who granted them land in Ohio, on which...
Let me say this. This guy here does some beautiful B-rolls. I like how he's going through the city and stuff like that there, and all the cobblestone streets and stuff. You can still see cobblestone streets here. And I know for a fact there's still cobblestone streets that still survive those years and years on the island where I'm from. You know what I mean? But I love the scenery. I love how he does his B-roll. It takes you into the story that he's telling. You know what I mean? Walking in history.
They should build a fort and settle 100 families. But the French saw it as theirs. What do you mean, what about the natives? In amongst the Anglo-French tension and skirmishes, a brother and fellow investor of the founders, called George Washington, was sent to a place in present-day Pennsylvania called Fort Le Boeuf. I think it was the French. On December the 12th, 1753, he gave the French commander an ultimatum. That's when all hell broke loose. Native tribes picked sides, and this French and Indian War would spark the global conflict of the 7 Years' War. What mattered to Peter was that a few months into the war, it brought a raiding party of 12 Lenape braves to attack his homestead. The full horrors of what he went through are retold in his own book. And there's also a more readable book, Indian Peter. But the savagery of what happens next, I'm going to leave for those who read the book. The barbarity and bloodlust of what was perpetrated in settlers is beyond anything I can understand. Would I understand it better if people came across an ocean and stole my home and subjugated my people? I can't say. But Peter had been farming land that had been theirs. Now he was their slave. Not indentured servitude this time, but taken on a forced march on a long road towards real inhuman enslavement. He could only be glad that Rose had been away at her parents when it happened.
Wow.
Some months later, having seen and experienced things that no one should have to, Peter was taken on a raid. Not as a warrior, but as a mule to carry booty back to the village. On this raid, he found himself in a country that he recognised. Might there be a chance of escape? Could he even dare to dream? Being caught in the act would mean certain death, and he'd seen the way that others had died before him. One night, as his tormentors slept, unsuspecting, Peter rose, checked for life, stole himself to the task before stealing away into the forest. Each step was slow and silent, but as distance grew, so did his pace, until he felt sure that sound wouldn't carry, and he burst into a run. He ran, and he ran, and he ran, and he ran. How long is a lifetime? It lasts until you hear the angry cries of your pursuers, and then you keep running in hell. I'm not going to recount all that happened between then and Peter's arrival at a remote homestead, but the first appearance of a man they'd thought killed months before, battered, scarred, and half naked, semi-clad in Indian garb, scared the homesteaders every bit as much as the approach of a scalping raid.
Wow, that's crazy.
When he
He
dressed
escaped.
he set out on the 140-mile journey to his in-laws to be reunited with Rose. It was when he got there that he discovered that she was dead. Continental provincial regiments were being set up to take the fight to the enemy, whether he be native or French. And Peter Williamson said, "Count me in." And by spring of 1755, he'd regained enough strength and fitness to be counted in. Now, the details of his further adventures in the French and Indian War take up much of the book, but I'll leave that for you to read for yourself. Suffice to say, there were adventures, from which he emerged with minimally debilitating war wounds. Thus he found himself on the 6th of November 1756, after a prisoner of war stint in what we'd call Canada, on a French prison ship in Plymouth Harbour. As part of a prisoner exchange, he was home. Well, not quite home. In April 1757, on good conduct but unfit for further service, he was discharged and given 6 shillings. Now, I don't know if you've ever tried to get to Aberdeen on 6 shillings. Every time I walk past a train station in Dundee, somebody's trying to do it. And if I could just give them a couple of quid for a drink, they might just make it. Peter had a set of deerskin clothing, an Indian tomahawk, knife, and a pipe. And so he walked north, stopping in every town where, in return for a few pennies, he'd regale folk with stories, recollections, and demonstrations of life in a Red Indian village on the American frontier. In each town, he'd hone his tales and improve his performance. But by the time he reached York, he'd run out of money. Somehow, he managed to raise the funds to put his stories in print, And thus, Peter Williamson, abductee, indentured servant, happily married farmer, Red Indian slave escapee, and now colonial British Army veteran, saw the publication of his first book with a snappy title, French and Indian Cruelty Exemplified in the Life and Various Vicissitudes of Fortune of Peter Williamson, a Disbanded Soldier. That's going to fly off the shelves. He now had post-show merchandise, just like you get from Scotland history tours. We've got mugs, we've got t-shirts. Let me tell you a story, hoodies in Gaelic and English. You can see some of the products underneath the video or click the link in the description to find the shop on my website. I just need a couple of quid to get me to Aberdeen. When he reached Aberdeen, that was where his real troubles began. The first thing that Peter did when he arrived was to look up his long-lost mother and father. Just like his wife before, he found that they'd both died, never knowing what had happened to their son.
Wow.
Just opposite the train station in Aberdeen, you'll find what in those days would have been the merchant quarter. In that quarter, you'll find what remains of the gable end of the barn in which Peter had been held for a time after capture. Of course, the henchman who'd abducted him and held him there never for a minute expected him to come back to Aberdeen. The magistrates who signed papers stating that a minor had willingly sold himself into servitude couldn't have anticipated the return of the adult. The ship's captain, who transported him, thought it was a one-way ticket.
Wow.
The merchants, whose communal enterprise had facilitated the whole sordid business, definitely didn't want their victim on the streets of Aberdeen, dancing with tomahawk in hand, telling the tale to gathered crowds and selling it in a book in which their name was blackened. Something had to be done. The Procurator Fiscal was asked to pursue claims of upright men so dishonourably slandered in this libelous book. When asked, Peter freely admitted that he was the writer of the book of his own life's experiences, starting here in Aberdeen. That is how Peter ended up a captive once more. Behind me, scaffolded, is Aberdeen's toll booth. Like many abducted boys, Peter would have been held there for a time before being shipped off to the Americas. That shows you how much local authorities colluded with the abductors. In the Americas, he'd been held captive by French and then natives. Now he was back in the same place, in the same town, jailed by the very people who'd held him there in the first place.
Wow.
And he wouldn't be released until he paid restitution for the harm done to the reputations of these respectable gentlemen. Peter said that he would not. His life had been thrown into turmoil when these so-called gentlemen had him abducted from the streets of Aberdeen. He'd been transported, he'd been enslaved, he'd faced war and further imprisonment. He was not about to absolve the men who had caused it all. In which case, you'll go back to the toll booth. Faced with this, he had no alternative. Peter was fined 10 shillings. The offending pages of his book were to be cut out in the presence of the Dean of Guild and the town clerk. On an appointed day, those pages would be brought and burned by the hangman at the Market Cross.
Censorship.
Peter would be required to sign a letter of submission and confession that would be published in Aberdeen and in York. And he was to be banished from Aberdeen.
Wow.
Where do you go when life's treated you so cruelly? Where do you go when you haven't a friend in the world? Where do you go when your misery is even greater than life in Aberdeen. Edinburgh, of course.
You know, here's what I'm going to say about that, okay? So he got kidnapped and taken away. And while he was gone all this time and stuff, these people that did this are still living, and then when he came back, they're still living. But nobody really gonna believe him because of the status of the people that did it to him. Or the people believe him but felt powerless to do anything to the people who did it to him because they had status and political pull then. That's kind of like the same thing now, man. That's, you know what I'm saying? When they take you, you know what I mean, you're so rich and powerful, and you're so entangled in the government, you're pretty much, so in some cases, untouchable. That's like taking stuff from all those years back, a century or so back, and just dropping the whole thing. We are so predictable, man. Especially when it comes to doing awful stuff to each other, we are so predictable. But we're not predictable in love, though, because we love people and still stab them in the back. Let's get back to this video here.
Indian Peter, as he'd now become known, wasn't finished. In fact, his life was just beginning. In the 18th century, these streets bustled like a Saturday on a fringe weekend. Solicitors frequented the courts at the other side of St Giles. Merchants sold their wares in the high street here. There were coffee shops by day and houses of ill repute by night. Edinburgh was a smelly, smoky hubbub of sights and sounds. It was the heart of Scotland, its biggest town. Indian Peter set up a coffee shop here that was frequented by men such as the poet Alan Ramsay and other luminaries. He became a central figure in the town. He rubbed shoulders with Deacon Brodie. He became the inspiration for characters in books other than his own. And it was from here that he plotted his revenge on his tormentors. If you want to know how he did that and much more, then let me know in the comment section below. If enough of you tell me that you want to hear the rest of the Indian Peter story, then I'll maybe make a video about that to come up on screen. Until then, here's one about Enlightenment Scotland and coffee shops in Edinburgh. Click top right to become a Patreon member.
That was quite interesting. Wow, can you imagine though? That was like a repatriation there, you know. He went back home and then get there, and they still. Where did he go all these years? Where was he? You know, didn't anybody like question the vibe, or because of the rich people didn't want anybody to know because they were involved, that they just swept it under the rug? And for some strange reason, man. You see, poor people, I've noticed something about poor people here. They act like if they don't believe rich people and they don't like what rich people are doing, but then they pick a side that's got rich people in it anyway. Thinking that those group of rich people is really caring about them. And I'm talking about our situation here in general. You understand what I'm saying? Anyway, man, I'll leave a link in the description to this video so you can go check it out and also leave links to videos that I've reacted to on Scotland, history, culture. You know what I mean? I do it all in that bad boy there. You know, let's all learn about each other from each other. If you like this video, drop a comment in the comment section, drop a like, share the video with your friends and thing. Thank you all for all the comments and stuff like that. Also, thank you for the super thanks that I've been getting from some people. It goes back to the channel and thing. You understand what I'm say? In the meantime, man, y'all take care of each other. Cool runnings.